In this episode, a nurse from the Philippines apologizes for not being allowed to save the life of a child. Greetings, this is The Hardest Word. I'm Brett Doot.
I'm sorry for that.
I'm really sorry.
Forgive me.
And I deeply regret we hadn't done it.
My remorse.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
This episode's apology is anonymous from a nurse in the Philippines, and the reasons for the anonymity are pretty obvious. This nurse is whistleblowing on her employer, a small hospital, and she'd like to keep on working at that hospital. It revolves around the anti-hospital deposit law. It is a recent piece of legislation from 2017 which was intended to stop the practice of hospitals in the Philippines demanding a financial deposit before treating patients. Naturally, if you did not have the cash on hand to lay down the deposit, you didn't get the care you needed. And I know this is not unique to the Philippines. Sadly, despite law that demands hospitals stop the practice of asking for a deposit, it has returned and it continues, particularly during COVID. Senator Riza Hontiveros in the Philippines Parliament gave examples of ordinary, everyday Filipinos being asked to deposit $500 or more US just to enter hospital, which is far beyond the means of many. We're about to hear an example of that and the utterly avoidable tragedy that ensued. This is undoubtedly a heartbreaking apology, and it just shows the highly complex and unjust circumstances you can find yourself in the middle of the night, thanks to circumstances far beyond your control.
Prior to the anti-deposit law, which was enacted back in 2017, there was no problem on private hospitals demanding cash deposits from patients before admitting them and treating them. I witnessed firsthand the reasons why the anti-deposit law had to be enacted. I was working in a private hospital. I won't name it. It's relatively small that can only cater up to 50 beds. I was assigned to the emergency department. One night, while I was on the swing shift, a man who's cradling a baby all wrapped with a blanket, accompanied by a woman, rushed to the ER. We immediately tended to them. The father told us it worried them that their baby had become unresponsive. He was right to be worried. As I was taking the baby's vital signs, I can barely feel the pulse. The resident doctor's assessment was severe dehydration. According to the mother, her 7-month-old baby girl had diarrhea for 5 days straight, and that morning, they noticed that their baby hadn't been awake since the preceding night. They weren't able to seek medical attention because they didn't have the money. The father was a construction worker, while the mother didn't have any job, and worse, they have 7 children. The family, who barely gets food on their plate, had 7 children. I couldn't imagine how hard their life was. Doctors were a luxury they couldn't afford. It took me quite a while to administer the intravenous fluid, since the baby's veins are almost impossible to locate. When I finally did, we promptly gave her a bolus of isotonic solution. The baby was so dehydrated, she cried invisible tears. I was able to wipe only a tiny drop. We thought the baby was going to be okay until the admission officer asked the parents for a cash deposit. We nurses couldn't do anything. It was the hospital's policy, and we were just mere employees. Although we already ran the fluids, the baby still needed medications. Medications that can only be bought outside the hospital because the hospital did not have any. medications that are supposed to save the baby's life. The parents didn't have a penny in them. All they have is hope. Hope that their baby survives. A hope that they were unwittingly denied. I signaled my colleagues and asked them if they can contribute any amount, and they did without hesitation. We were able to shell out enough money to pay the used isotonic solution and the intravenous set. We likewise managed to buy 3 500 ml bottles of lactated ringer solution to replace the one used, and for follow-ups. The baby needed to be admitted to an intensive care unit, but without the deposit, this was impossible. So the baby remained in the emergency room for 6 hours. 6 hours while her father went to find a way to get the needed money for the cash deposit. 6 hours to find a way to save his daughter's life. We monitored the baby closely. We made sure that we administer the fluids in the right rate and within the prescribed period. We did everything that we could. But despite all our efforts, the baby, still in the ER, died the next morning. We nurses didn't speak to the parents. We did not know what to say. Not long after her death, the funeral services team came to take away the baby's body. Right at that moment, me and my colleagues felt like we don't deserve to be in the nursing profession. We tried not to get overly dramatic, but the baby's death momentarily took away our faith in humanity. We felt like we hadn't done enough. I apologized to the baby for something that I couldn't put into words. I apologized to the baby on behalf of her parents, who didn't take urgent action during the onset of her diarrhea. She could have suffered only the mildest of symptoms. I apologized to the parents on behalf of the government, who obviously failed in educating and providing the health teachings to the people in remote areas, the people who need it the most. I apologize to the government on behalf of the wealthy nations who seemed like they care about third world countries like ours, but in reality, it isn't in their best interest to help us. I apologize to myself on behalf of this rotten system.
Thank you to our nurse apologizer and to our nurses everywhere for the work you do. Hopefully you are supported by the systems that you work within. That apology that we've just heard is going to feature among 6 or 7 or 8 other apologies on our new upcoming compilation, Apologies from the Philippines, where we're going to gather together a bunch of apologies with one thing in common: their origin. We're doing the same with India and also the continent of Africa. One of the reasons I'm doing the compilation is that I suspect we have a bit of a fan base in the Philippines. Week after week, one of our most popular episodes of the podcast is from relatively long ago, an episode called No Feelings for Fred. It is not a tearjerker. It is love gone wrong. It's very sort of romantic, and not a happy ending for Fred anyway. But it continues to pop up on our most listened to episodes each and every week. So that's lovely. And I hope you enjoyed the gathering, the compilation of Filipina apologies. Well, it's time to bring this whole sorry business to a close. On behalf of our audio director, Brian Wallace, and me, your host, Brett DeHoot, thanks for listening. The website, thehardestwordpodcast.com. Farewell.